Welcome to Heartfelt Stories. Prepare yourself for the most shocking, emotional, and heart-wrenching stories you have ever heard. Betrayal, love, revenge, and jaw-dropping twists. We bring you stories that will leave you speechless and craving for more. Have you ever trusted someone only to be shattered? What if a billionaire's past mistake comes back to haunt him? What if the woman he abandoned returns with his children? These are the kinds of stories we tell, full of drama, suspense, and unforgettable moments. Do not just watch, be a part of the journey. Hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell because trust me, you do not want to miss what is coming next. Now, are you ready for a story that will shake your soul? Let us begin. No one expected a billionaire CEO to fall in love with a woman who spent her nights sleeping on a toilet floor. But fate does not ask for permission. It just happens. And when Ethan Carter, a man who had everything, power, wealth, and the perfect life, walked into his office's janitor's closet that night, he had no idea that his world was about to turn upside down. Ethan had been working late, his mind cluttered with billion-dollar deals and corporate battles. But as he stepped into the restroom, an unfamiliar sight stopped him. Curled up in the corner, hidden behind the supply shelves, was a woman, fast asleep. Her body trembled slightly, her uniform wrinkled, and her arms hugged herself as if the cold had stolen every ounce of warmth from her. She was not just resting. She had nowhere else to go. For a moment, he just stared. A cleaning lady, sleeping in his building? It did not make sense. But something about the way she lay there, vulnerable yet peaceful, stirred something deep inside him, a feeling he could not explain. His footsteps echoed against the marble floor, making the woman stir. Her eyes fluttered open, panic flashing across her face as she scrambled to sit up. She looked terrified, as if she expected to be thrown out instantly. Ethan's voice was calm, yet firm. "What are you doing here?" Her lips parted, but no words came out. She looked down, ashamed. And in that moment, Ethan Carter, the ruthless CEO who never let emotions control him, felt something foreign, an undeniable pull toward a woman who should have been invisible to him. He just did not know why. Yet. She looked down at her trembling hands, her voice barely above a whisper. I did not mean to fall asleep here. I had nowhere else to go." Ethan studied her, his sharp eyes scanning every detail. Her uniform was old but clean, her hands rough from hard work. She did not smell of expensive perfume like the women in his world. Instead, she smelled of soap and exhaustion. She was different. "Nowhere else?" he repeated, his voice quieter this time. She hesitated, then nodded. "I lost my apartment last month. I worked 2 shifts, but it is not enough. I was saving for a place, but until then, I just needed a place to rest for a few hours." Her voice cracked, but she lifted her chin. She was not begging. She was explaining. Something tightened in Ethan's chest. He had built an empire from nothing, fought his way to the top, but this woman's struggle was different. It was raw, unfiltered survival. "You sleep on a toilet floor instead of asking for help?" he asked, his tone unreadable. Her eyes flashed with something fierce, pride. "I do not take charity. I earn what I need." That answer made him pause. She was not weak. She was not a victim. She was a fighter, and for reasons he could not understand, that stirred something inside him. For the first time in years, Ethan Carter found himself wanting to know more about someone who had nothing to offer him. And that was dangerous. Ethan had met countless women, models, heiresses, women who dripped in diamonds and whispered sweet words for a taste of his wealth. But this woman was different. She had nothing, yet she carried herself with a quiet strength that intrigued him. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice softer than before. She hesitated, as if debating whether to tell him. "Sophia," she finally said. "Sophia." The name settled in his mind, unexpectedly familiar. He did not know why, but it suited her. Simple, honest, unlike the world he lived in. Ethan exhaled, glancing at his watch. It was past midnight. He should have walked away. This was not his problem. But something about the thought of her spending another night curled up on the cold tiles made him restless. "You cannot sleep here," he said. Her expression did not change, but he saw the flicker of fear in her eyes. She thought he was going to fire her. That realization unsettled him. "I am not letting you go," he clarified, "but if you keep sleeping on a floor, you will end up in a hospital." She straightened her shoulders. "I can handle myself." Ethan studied her again, fascinated by her resilience. She was used to being alone, used to struggling, but for some reason that did not sit well with him. Without another word, he pulled out his wallet and retrieved a black card. He held it out to her. "Take this. Get yourself a hotel for the night." Sophia's eyes widened, then narrowed with suspicion. She did not reach for it. "I told you, I do not take charity." Ethan almost smiled. Almost. She was stubborn. He liked that. "Then do not think of it as charity," he said. "Think of it as an investment. My company cannot have exhausted employees falling asleep in supply closets. Take the card, get some rest, and return to work in the morning. That is all." Sophia stared at the card, her pride warring with exhaustion. For a moment, Ethan thought she would refuse. But then, slowly, hesitantly, she reached out and took it. She had no idea that this one decision would change both of their lives forever. Sophia held the black card between her fingers, its weight heavier than it should have been. She'd never touched something so expensive, so powerful. But more than that, she'd never met a man like Ethan Carter, a billionaire who noticed someone like her. "Do not overthink it," Ethan said, watching her reaction carefully. "Just go." Sophia swallowed hard. Every instinct told her to refuse, to prove she could handle things on her own. But her body ached. Exhaustion clouded her mind, and the thought of a real bed, just for one night, was too tempting to resist. She nodded, gripping the card tightly. "I will pay you back." Ethan's lips curved slightly, the closest thing to a smile she had seen from him. "We will see." Without another word, he turned and walked away, his long strides confident, effortless, like a man who was used to controlling the world around him. But, for the first time, he had just done something entirely out of character. He had cared. Sophia watched him disappear down the hallway, her heart pounding for reasons she did not understand. Why had he helped her? Why had he looked at her like that? She did not have the answers. But what she did know was that this night, this moment, was just the beginning of something far bigger than she could ever imagine. And neither of them were ready for what was coming next. Sophia stepped into the hotel lobby, feeling like an imposter in a world she did not belong to. The marble floors gleamed under the golden lights, and the air smelled of expensive cologne and fresh-cut roses. She had cleaned places like this, but she had never dared to step inside as a guest. The receptionist barely glanced at her worn-out uniform before her gaze landed on the black card in Sophia's hand. Instantly, her demeanor changed. Respect, deference, the power of wealth was undeniable. "Welcome, Miss," Sophia hesitated before straightening her shoulders. Just Sophia. The receptionist smiled. Of course. Right this way. Minutes later, she stepped into a suite that felt like another universe. The bed was massive, covered in soft white linens. The city skyline stretched out beyond the glass walls, lights twinkling like stars. For the first time in years, she felt safe. She stood in front of the mirror, taking in her reflection. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, her hair was a mess, and her uniform clung to her thin frame. She looked like a stranger in this world of luxury. Her fingers tightened around the card. Ethan Carter had given her this, but why? She did not believe in kindness without reason. Men like him did not help people like her. And yet, he had. She exhaled slowly, pushing the thoughts away. Just for tonight, she would allow herself to rest. Just for tonight, she would accept this strange twist of fate. What she did not know was that Ethan Carter was not done with her yet. And neither was fate. Ethan sat in his penthouse, staring out at the city skyline, but his mind was elsewhere. On her. He had spent years building his empire, shutting out distractions, keeping emotions buried beneath layers of power and logic. So why could he not stop thinking about a cleaning lady who had nothing to do with his world? He had helped her on impulse. That was all. Or at least, that was what he told himself. But something about the way she had looked at him, defiant, proud, unwilling to accept pity, had stirred something inside him that he could not ignore. He picked up his phone, hesitating for only a second before dialing a number. "Find everything you can about a woman named Sophia," he instructed his assistant. "She works in our building's cleaning staff." There was a brief silence before the response came. "Right away, sir." Ethan ended the call and leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. What was it about her? He had seen beautiful women, powerful women, women who tried to capture his attention with designer dresses and practiced charm. But Sophia had not asked for anything. She had only wanted to survive, and that, strangely, made him want to know more. Meanwhile, across the city, Sophia lay in the luxurious bed, staring at the ceiling, sleep refusing to come. Because no matter how soft the pillows were, no matter how warm the blankets felt, she could not shake the feeling that her life had just changed forever. She just did not know how much. Morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting golden hues over the luxurious suite. But Sophia was already awake. She had barely slept. Her body had rested, but her mind had not. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him. Ethan Carter. His piercing gaze, his unreadable expression, the way he had looked at her as if she were not invisible. She sat up, gripping the edge of the silk sheets. This was not her life. This was a borrowed moment, a temporary illusion. She needed to leave before she got too comfortable. With a deep breath, she slid out of bed and dressed in the same uniform from last night. The worn fabric felt like reality wrapping itself back around her. She was a cleaning lady, not a woman who belonged in places like this. As she reached for the black card, guilt twisted in her chest. She had promised to return it, but how could she ever repay a night like this? Determined, she grabbed a hotel envelope, slid the card inside, and wrote 2 words in neat handwriting. "Thank you." Leaving it at the front desk, she hurried out before her heart could change its mind. But as she stepped into the cold morning air, heading toward the only world she knew, she had no idea that her quiet exit was not the end. Because Ethan Carter was already waiting for her at the office, and he had no intention of letting her disappear. Sophia entered the towering glass building, her heart pounding in her chest. Last night had felt like a dream, but now she was back in reality. The uniform, the routine, the exhaustion, this was her world. She had just stepped into the service hallway when a voice stopped her cold. "You left without saying goodbye." Her breath caught. She turned slowly, her eyes meeting Ethan Carter's. He was standing there, dressed in a sharp suit, his presence commanding the space like he owned it. Because he did. "I did not think you would notice," she said quietly. Ethan's gaze flickered to the small envelope in his hand, the one she had left at the hotel. He held it between his fingers, unreadable. "You returned the card." "I told you I would," she replied, keeping her voice steady. Something flashed in his eyes. Amusement? Frustration? She could not tell. "You really are stubborn," he muttered, more to himself than to her. Sophia straightened her spine. "I appreciate what you did, but I do not want any special treatment. I just want to do my job." Ethan studied her for a long moment. Most people would have taken advantage of his generosity. But she was different, and that only made him more curious. "Fine," he said, slipping the envelope into his pocket. "Do your job." Relief washed over her, but just as she turned to leave, his voice stopped her again. "But from now on," Ethan added smoothly, "you will not be a cleanin' lady." She froze, her heart hammering. "What?" His lips curved slightly, a challenge in his gaze. "You work for me now, Sophia. Personally." Her world tilted. This was not what she had expected. Not at all. Sophia stared at Ethan, convinced she had misheard him. Work for him? Personally? That did not make sense. I do not understand," she said carefully. "What do you mean?" Ethan stepped closer, his presence overwhelming, his voice calm but firm. "It means I do not want you scrubbing floors anymore. From now on, you will work as my personal assistant." Sophia felt her breath hitch. Personal assistant? That was a position people fought for, something that came with power, influence, things she had never imagined for herself. "But I have no experience for that," she protested. "I am just—" "You are not just anything," Ethan interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You are smart, you are hard-working, and I do not make offers twice." Her heart pounded. Why was he doing this? What did he see in her that made him take this risk? "I do not want charity," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan's eyes darkened. "If this were charity, I would have written you a check and walked away." His gaze held hers, unwavering. "This is not about pity, Sophia. I want you in my office, by my side. You can either accept the opportunity or go back to scrubbing floors. Your choice." Sophia's mind raced. This was insane. This was reckless. But deep down, something told her. This was her chance. She inhaled sharply, lifting her chin. "Fine, I will take the job." Ethan's lips twitched as if he had expected no less. "Good. You start tomorrow." As he walked away, Sophia exhaled shakily. She had just stepped into a world she was not prepared for. But what she did not know was that this was only the beginning. The next morning, Sophia stood in front of Ethan Carter's office, her heart pounding harder than it ever had before. The uniform she had worn for years was gone, replaced by a sleek professional dress, a gift from Ethan's assistant. She barely recognized herself. The heavy doors opened, and she stepped inside. Ethan sat at his massive desk, his focus on a document, but the moment she entered, his sharp eyes lifted to hers. "You are on time," he noted. "I always am," she replied, refusing to shrink under his gaze. His lips curved slightly as if he appreciated her defiance. Good. Then let us get something clear before we begin. He stood and walked toward her, his presence making the air feel heavier. Dangerous. Electric. I do not hire people out of kindness, Sophia, he said, his voice deep, steady. You are here because I see something in you, something different. But if you cannot handle this world, if you break under pressure, I will not hesitate to let you go. Sophia swallowed, meeting his stare. I do not break easily. Ethan studied her for a long moment, then nodded. We will see. Days turned into weeks, and Sophia proved herself over and over again. She learned fast, handled impossible tasks, and never let the weight of the billionaire world crush her. But what she did not expect was how much harder it was to ignore the growing tension between her and Ethan. It was in the way his gaze lingered too long, the way his voice softened when he said her name, the way he protected her, even when she did not ask for it, and the way her heart betrayed her every time he was near. But Ethan Carter was a man who controlled everything, including his emotions. And falling for Sophia? That was a risk he was not willing to take, or so he thought, until the night that changed everything.